So all I'm going to do first to start out, what I just did there was I couldn't really read the names. So if you see this vertical black line with the little arrows, if I double left click, it auto fits to whatever's in that column. So it makes it just a little bit easier for me to read those variable names. Now, that's the first thing I'm going to do. I have the filters turned on. I don't think I showed you this last class, did I? I don't think I got there with you. So one thing that we can do is a nice little trick. If I started out with some data, if I go to the very top here in the cell A1, right, that's that cell's reference, I hold Control and Shift, or if you're on a Mac, hold Command and Shift, and I hit my over and down arrow, right? It's going to select my entire data set. Okay? From there, I go to the Data tab. I already have the filter option selected on. If I turn it off, notice when I turn it back on, it puts these little arrows here on each variable. Okay? So I could do something like sort the data by smallest to largest. If I have a variable that's not a number but qualitative, I can sort it A to Z or Z to A. And it just makes sure that my observations, right, this observation, if I filter it, will always like move the entire row of data all together. Right, so I'm not mixing up my observations. Okay, so the first thing that we're going to want to do, move this over here. I'm going to not show the variables that we're not going to use. So we're going to use this variable in column G, which is COVID-19 deaths recorded at the state level, and I think we have got Puerto Rico and Washington, D.C. as well. So if I want to try to figure out, okay, I want to create, one second. I want to create a frequency distribution, right, or a histogram eventually, but I don't know what my bin length should be, right? So we have continuous data here. I mean, if we want to be real technical, the number of deaths is discrete. Half a person can't die. But it's such a wide range of values that even with discrete data, if it's a wide enough range, we might have to use a histogram, right? So I've got the things I need for that to calculate the optimal bin length would be the minimum, maximum, and the number of bins I want. Let's say I'm going to use 6 bins. How will I find the maximum? So in Excel, if I put an equal sign in a cell, it tells Excel, I want you to do something for me, right? Usually it's a built-in function, or potentially it's just a math formula. Add up these numbers, divide by this, take it to this power. But for us, we want to use that max formula, which will find the maximum of whatever numbers we select, okay? So I can go here. I'm going to move the chat bar so I can see it. And in this max formula, I put a parentheses, and it says, okay, select the numbers you want. I'm going to select every single state's recorded COVID deaths, right? And it automatically puts in the cell reference there. Find the maximum of the cells G2 to G53, or basically the entire variable. I'll hit enter, and sure enough, it finds that maximum. I can actually double check this by filtering largest to smallest. Sure enough, it's returning to me that maximum value. Okay? If equals max is finding the maximum, to find the minimum, equals min. Okay? Once again, we can select this entire column. Instead of using my mouse, though, because especially if you're on a laptop, that's going to become pretty tough. Right? If you hold Control and Shift and then hit the down arrow, it automatically goes to the very last observation. So now I go up here. Oh, if I can get this to cooperate, it's not going to, but right? It actually selected that for me as well. So you can select it with your mouse. You can use that Control Shift at the down arrow, or on a Mac, once again, Command Shift down arrow, and it should select the data for you pretty easily. Okay. So we now have the things that we need. I'm going to tell Excel, I want you to do this formula for me, which is, to go back to those slides, it's take the maximum. So all I have to do, I don't have to type that number in. I just select on the cell that has that number, and it says, okay, take the value in L1, or the maximum, subtract the value in L2, which is the minimum, divide by the number of bins, and it returns you these values. So why? What did I do wrong here? Yeah, right? So just like a calculator in Excel, you got to think about order of operations. And honestly, in Excel, even more so, just get used to using parentheses to make sure that you're doing the order of operations correctly, right? So I'll get parentheses around that because that's what I want in the numerator, the difference between the max and the min, and then divide it by the number of bins. That looks a little bit more reasonable. Now, it's not the prettiest number to like put on a graph. So what I'm actually going to do, just because it's a little bit cleaner of a number to deal with and to think about, is I'm just going to push this all the way up to 2,500. Now, that's some nice clean cutoffs for my bins. Okay. So now I've got the bin length that I want to use. I'm going to set up a little table. I'm going to create a column of labels here in just a second. I'm going to create the minimum of each bin and the maximum of each bin. And eventually, what we want is what's the frequency in each one of these bins. Okay. And I'm going to expand these cells just so we can read them a little bit easier. So someone's asking how I got the number of bins on the chat. That's something you choose. So on a homework assignment or something, I'll give that to you, right? We could do this with 20. And in fact, once we get to the end, maybe not today, but maybe on Monday, I could show you what would happen if you wanted to change the number of bins from like 6 to 10.
Even if you change it now, limit the bin length change by itself.
Yeah, so it'll tell me what the new bin length should be, right? Because I was using cell references. If I change this to 10, notice that bin length changes. Now, obviously, this one doesn't because I was kind of choosing that one, not from the formula. But yeah, my formula where I use the cell references will now use that, and that's the real power of Excel. Is if I type these numbers in, yeah, I'm going to get the same answers. But if anything changes, I got to go all the way back through and redo it. In Excel, you can set up these templates where everything, right, gets the exchange, okay? So what do the bins represent on a graph? Okay, so I can go back here. So remember, what do these bins represent on a graph? Essentially, they will be replacing these labels. Instead of the different causes of death, we'll have things like 0 to 2,500 deaths. 2,500 to 5, they'll be replacing our x-axis. Okay, this is a good question. So to go through the labels, really that first bin is going to be from 0 to 2,500. The next one would be 2,500 to 5,000. And really this part, creating the labels, this is just what you're going to see on the graph. So I could take a little bit more time on these or not. Yeah. Yeah. So when I said I could be a little bit more exact, you're jumping ahead but you're thinking about this right. So the issue is here. What if it was exactly 2,500 deaths? It'd be in both bins. So I probably should be a little bit more specific and do something like this, right? So less than or equal to 2,500, and then when I'm down here, something like that, right? And I could go through and type that in. So because you asked for it, we'll do it. So what I would actually do here, instead of typing everything in over and over, I would just copy and paste these, and then go back in and just change the numbers. I mean, it saves me a little bit of time. And here it's really just a matter of like, this is going to be a little bit tedious to create the labels. And honestly, I probably shouldn't even waste a lot of time with it because I'm not trying to teach you how to make pretty graphs. I'm trying to show you the data portion of them, but I want to have something when we get done here that at least looks somewhat decent.
If I wanted to simplify it, could I start with like 2,499?
2,499. If you wanted to, if you didn't want to worry about the equality, the only issue there is here it's okay because the number of deaths. So the question was, could you, instead of typing these less than or equal to, can I make this 2,499, keep this one at 2,500, so on and so forth? The issue with that is going to be when we do have a continuous variable, then I have to put like 2499.9999, you know, if I really want to be technical about it. And so usually kind of using these equalities is probably a safe way to go just in case you get that continuous variable. But yeah, you're thinking about it correctly. So I've got my labels. I'm now just going to put in this minimum value of my bin, and I'm going to put in the maximum value of the bin. Now, I'm going to do something here that you don't necessarily, you could enter these in manually, right? I could put in, it's basically taking the values in the labels and just putting them into columns. But I'm going to show you a different way to do it because it allows me to tell you a couple other things about Excel that we'll need moving forward, right? So the very first thing is, I know that the maximum of that first bin will just be, well, we're starting at 0, so it's just going to be whatever my bin length is, right? Or I could say it is 0 plus that bin length. Right? Now, I hit enter there. Okay, that looks good. What will notice the value that's the minimum of this bin was the maximum of the previous bin. So same here, same here, same here, same here. So what I could do is say, well, the minimum of this bin is actually just the maximum of the previous bin. So if I have it set up like this, the reason why this will be useful is because if I copy things down in Excel, so see here we have M9. If I left click down here when it becomes this bold plus sign and I copy it down, notice M9 became M10. And when I copied it down 2 rows, it updated it 2 rows. So it's M11 now. So that's nice because eventually, once I have the maximums over here, it'll just be grabbing the maximum of the previous bin. Okay, so we've got, so you're saying right here, so the question I had in the chat was, can you show, okay, yep, this is what you wanted to see, the maximum of the bin. All I did there was take where that bin started, and I added the bin length to it, okay? Now, if I copy this down, the problem is I start getting these, so what went wrong? Because like, I should just be on the next bin, taking 2,500, adding 2,500 to it and getting 5,000, but it's not working right. So let's see why. Oh, well, it's because L6, once I copied it down, got updated to L7, and there's nothing in L7, right? I actually wanted, you know, this cell reference to update, L10, but I didn't want that cell reference to update. So I go back to the original, and yeah, I want to keep using the minimum of each bin. So I want L9 to update, but L6, I want to always use what's there. So one way I can do that in Excel is it's called freezing the cell reference, right? So I put dollar signs in front of the row and column heading. And now when I copy this down, L6 stays L6. Doesn't matter if I copy it across 50 rows or, you know, or down 50 rows or across 50 columns, it stays the same. So now when I copy this down, well, it looks like it's working, and it is, because now I'm taking the minimum of the bin and adding to it that bin length, right? And so I can copy these down, and it saves me a lot of work. I mean, it's a little bit, you know, kind of got to figure out at first, but then once I can copy it down, I don't have to like type this in again over and over and over and over. Right? And going back to talking about using cell references if things change, notice maybe I want to change to 3,000. It updates all of those minimum maxims for my bin format, right? So that's kind of nice. So now we're finally to the part where we can start to talk about it. I did a little bit of front work there to get the, you know, where I'm at, because all I really wanted was frequencies, right? And all this work, all I really needed is frequencies. Well, you'll see why setting it up this way helps me get those frequencies pretty easily, all right? So we'll use the Countifs formula, right? And what the Countifs formula does in Excel, it needs 4 things, okay? So the first thing it needs is, excuse me, what variable are you looking at? Like, what observations do you want? So the observations I want are COVID-19 deaths, so Control Shift or Command Shift down arrow. It'll select that range of data for me. I don't want to see that. actually not breaking. I should be, there you go. So I should be able to move it. No, select it again. Okay, so I selected that range of data. But now the next thing that I need to do is tell it, well, what do you want to check? Well, what I want to check is it greater than 0? And then the second thing I want to check is it less than or equal to 2,500? If it is, I want Excel to count it, right? So if it is meeting these criteria, I want Excel to count it. That's kind of why it's Countifs. Okay. The second thing we're going to tell it is it greater than 0? And instead of just putting in a 0 there, I'm going to actually select the cell, but because of the syntax that Excel needs, I need to put an and sign. I'm going to use a cell reference for the value I want. Okay. So similarly, anytime I use a greater than, less than, equals to sign here, I need to put it in quotation marks. That's just the syntax of Excel. Okay. So I want to go through this data, and I want to check to see, is this first criteria true, which is the observation greater than 0? Okay. But then I want to go back through and check it again and make sure, is it less than or equal to 2,500? So it may seem somewhat redundant, but because the Countifs function has uses for other situations as well, we actually have to type in that range of data again. So look through the data, and I typed it in instead of selecting it, because especially the large data set, it sends me to the bottom and I got to scroll all the way back up. Well, if I already know where it is, I can just kind of type that in. Okay? And then comma, the fourth and final thing it needs, is it less than or equal to, and you type it in like you say it. Less than sign comes first because less than or equal to. We'll then use an and sign. Is it less than or equal to 2,500, which is in that cell? And now this function should look through the data, count the number of observations that are greater than 0, look through the data, and only count them if it's also less than or equal to 2,500. Okay? So any questions up to this point? And hopefully, if we hit enter here, should get the number that we want. Right? So if I wanted to, right, the next one, I want to do the same thing for the next bin, but instead of 0 and 2,500, I want to use 2,500. So we'll say, is it greater than 2,500? Now the equality is only on one of those bins. And is it less than or equal to 5,000? Well, when I copy this down, it'll update L and M9 to L10 and M10. So that's awesome. But there's going to be a problem. If I look down here, not only, okay, yeah, these are updating, right? But what about the range of data? Oh, it's missing the first 5 observations because it updated those as well. So I have to go back to that very first bin and say, yeah, I want these values to change, but I don't want where the data is to change, right? So I'll put $signs in front of this. But here's another shortcut that we can use. If I select the references that I want to freeze, and don't do this before I finish the full statement, I'll hit F4. But on some laptops, if you have an FN key in the lower left-hand corner is usually where it's at, you have to hold FN and hit F4. And now notice it puts all those $signs in for me, freezes that whole cell reference. And if you're on a Mac, it's you select it and hold Command T. Why that's what it is, I have no idea. But Command T will put those $signs in for you. Okay? And then obviously we want to keep looking through the same range here too, so we can freeze these as well. Yeah.
So is it like deleting the data? When you don't do it?
It's not deleting it.
It's already been counted.
But notice it updates the cell reference. So what it's actually doing is it's only taking the observations from here all the way down. Yeah, it's just missing some of it. It's not deleting it, it's just it's missing some of it. Yep. Any other questions? Okay. All right. So now I'll go up here. This one was correct. I'll copy it down. And now we're making sure, okay, we're using the right values, 12,500 and 1,500, but we're also starting at the very top of that data. Yep. All right. So at this point, now we've got our frequencies and our labels. We can create a graph here. Okay. So I'm going to select the labels I want to use. This will be what goes on the x-axis, right? This was just like the types of death that we looked at when it was qualitative data. I'll then hold control, or I believe on a Mac, it's you hold command, and select the frequencies. So notice both these are now selected. I'll go up to this little insert tab here, and I've got all these chart types right here. So the chart type I want, I want a histogram, but remember, a histogram is just a bar chart where we started with continuous data. So I'm actually just going to go to this column chart, and move the Zoom chat here, and it gets my frequencies on the y-axis, plots every single one of those bins, throws in my labels down here. Okay. So pretty easy. Once you have the frequencies, select the labels, hold control or hold command on the Mac, select your frequencies, insert a bar chart. Don't get confused with, especially when I assign finally the first Excel assignment, which will probably be assigned Monday. Don't go up here. There's another way you can do this, which is select the data, go to insert. There's an option here called statistics chart. There's a histogram option, and you can try to do it this way. And like if I go here, there's some options. I can go. What is it? Left click. Yeah, I can go to format chart area, and I can start to play around with things and try to get a histogram to fit certain criteria. But notice it shows wild cutoff points here. There's some issues with the equalities. I've never seen someone for that first Excel assignment use the built-in histogram tool and get it right. And even if they get close, they usually said it took them forever anyways. So for that first Excel assignment, if you use the built-in histogram tool, I'm not going to give you any credit for doing that. I want you to use the other method, not just because, you might be able to use that histogram tool. Maybe you could do it perfect, but I need you to start to learn how to use some of these functions, right? Because we're going to build on it. So if you just use the built-in thing and there's not a built-in function for the next topic, well, now we got a problem, right? So I need you to kind of approach that first assignment when I get posted Monday in the similar way that we did this one, okay? And also added benefit is I can change things here, right? I could do like the 3,000, and actually, where'd my graph go? Did I delete it? I must have. Here, I'm going to create it again because I want to show you this. Insert column chart. Okay, there we go. So notice if I change this, this is when it was 3,000. If I change it back to 2,500, watch the frequencies and watch the graph changes. Not a whole lot because I'm not changing the value a ton, but it will automatically update everything, right? So this is how we want to start to get used to doing things in Excel, using these cell references so everything will update, right? Can you imagine if at every single place here, or even here, right? I would have typed 2,500, 5,000. It would take me forever to change this, right? If I wanted to change the bin line. Okay. Any questions up to this point? I'll do things a little bit quicker with you guys than I did earlier. So I want to make sure if there's any questions, you want to see a cell again, see what formula I had in the cell, make sure you ask now. A little bit of time. Okay. So let's go back here. So you'll see there's the frequency table in Excel. Here's kind of even a summary of some of the stuff that we're going to do. So I want to show you one more thing that we can do on top of frequencies, right? Oh, we got a question. We'll refresh this. Oh, reference. So yeah, This will be up on YouTube. You can go back and pause it and see what I'm saying here. It's kind of the added benefit of having this recorded as well, especially for those assignments. You can always go back and look at how to help for help from them. Okay, so we have that frequency distribution. I want to talk about a couple things here. Excuse me. How could I, using these frequencies, find the total number of observations? Remember last class we said, I've counted every single observation. Yeah, just add up the frequencies. So if I add up the frequencies, right, and hit enter, hit 52. Maybe that's right. So how could I check to see if that's right? Yeah, I could look at the data, and it goes from 2 to 53. So yeah, there are 52 observations. But if I had like thousands of observations, I don't want to scroll all the way down, or a nice way to make sure you're doing it correctly, and a function that we will likely use moving in the future. There's a count function in Excel, and all it does is whatever you select, it counts that cell if there's anything in it. So if I select a blank cell, it tells me 0. But if I select all my observations, Control Shift or Command Shift on a Mac, down arrow, sure enough, it tells me the number of observations. It's a good way to check to make sure that your frequencies add up to that value as well. Okay. Yep. Oh, I see. So you're saying, why can't I just scroll down and count where this? Oh, yeah. So instead of using the count function, so the question is, why would I use the count function if I could just go like this, right? Oh, okay, it's at 53, and so I know that's okay. I would say, depending on the setup of the Excel file, let's say I had a bunch of header stuff up here, and then I got to think, okay, it starts in 4, ends in. It's just a way to make sure you're not making a quick, easy mistake. And since basically you would have to hit Control Shift down arrow anyways, you might as well type in equals count and then select it. But yeah, that method, as long as you do the math in your head right, it should be okay. So we've got this check there. The next thing that we can do is, we talked about last class, relative frequencies. So how could I get relative frequencies here? Well, we said last class, all I do is take the frequency and divide it by the total number of observations, right? So I'll take the frequency, divide it by total number of observations, hit enter. Now, if I copy this down, I've got some issues. Let's see why. Okay, well, I'm still taking the frequency, but now I'm dividing it by, oh, this is way down here. I didn't want that reference for the total number of observations to change. So I'll go back up here and say, I need to freeze that, right? I need to always be dividing by 52. As I copy this down, I want to use, update the frequency that I'm using, but I always want to use the total number of observations. So I hit enter, copy this down, and now it looks like a little bit more accurate. What's a way I can check to make sure that I did these right? Should always equals 1. So we can use that sum function, right? That just adds up the numbers you select. Select the relative frequencies. All right, that's good. We didn't make any obvious mistake here, right? We still could have technically, but this kind of safeguards me that I'm probably doing things pretty darn close to right. Okay. Make sure there's no questions in the chat. Okay. So we got our relative frequencies to add up to 1. We talked about how we create the relative frequencies. We could create a graph for these as well. It's the same process. I would select my labels, select my relative frequencies, column chart. Now notice, I can get these both kind of on the same screen. They're the same thing, but here the axis is frequencies, here it's relative frequencies. Okay? So that's how actually, if you look on the slides, that's how I created those graphs. Right? Basically